Most businesses fail slowly. Sales drop, customers leave, and the company fades away. But these didn't fade. They collapsed spectacularly. Today, we're counting down the 10 worst business mistakes ever, starting with number 10, Roomba. But keep watching, because as we go on, the failures only get crazier and a lot dumber. In January 2021, iRobot was on top of the world. The company behind the Roomba had just watched its stock hit record highs. For nearly 2 decades, Roomba didn't just dominate robot vacuums, it was the robot vacuum. The brand had become a verb. If it cleaned your floor automatically, people called it a Roomba. At one point, iRobot controlled more than 60% of the global market and nearly 75% in the United States. They had sold over 40 million robots worldwide. They were profitable, they had premium pricing, and they believed the future of the smart home ran through them. Then everything collapsed. By 2024, their stock had fallen more than 90% from its peak. A $1.7 billion Amazon acquisition fell apart under regulatory pressure. Revenue plunged. Hundreds of employees were laid off. And eventually, the company that invented the category was pushed to the brink, fighting for survival in a market it created. This is how iRobot went from revolutionary innovator to takeover target in just a few brutal years. The story actually begins in 1990. Inside the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab, iRobot was founded by roboticists Colin Engel, Helen Greiner, and Rodney Brooks. But they were not building household gadgets. Their early business was military robotics. Their PackBot was deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan to defuse bombs. These machines were cutting-edge but niche. Governments only bought limited quantities, and research costs were massive. The pivot came in 2002. The founders realized that the same navigation technology used for military robots could be simplified and sold to consumers. The Roomba launched at around $200. Critics laughed. Many retailers thought it was a gimmick, but consumers loved it. By 2004, iRobot had sold 1 million units. By 2011, they were publicly traded and becoming a staple of modern homes. The company built what looked like an unbreakable moat. They accumulated more than 1,500 patents, covering movement, docking, navigation, and cleaning systems. They aggressively sued competitors. In 2017, they won a major patent case against a Chinese rival at the U.S. International Trade Commission. Cheap imports were blocked. Their premium pricing model survived. But while they were defending their castle, the ground was shifting beneath them. iRobot made a massive strategic bet on camera-based navigation called vSLAM. Their robots used upward-facing cameras to map rooms. It was advanced but expensive and required lighting. Meanwhile, Chinese competitors like Roborock, Ecovacs, and Dreamy adopted LiDAR laser mapping systems. LiDAR worked in the dark. It mapped faster. It became cheaper over time, and it allowed competitors to leapfrog iRobot technologically. By 2019, you could buy a robot vacuum from a Chinese manufacturer that vacuumed and mopped simultaneously, emptied its own dustbin, and used LiDAR mapping for hundreds of dollars less than a Roomba. Shark entered the space aggressively, undercutting prices. The premium aura of Roomba began to fade. Then came the pandemic boom. In 2020, demand for home electronics surged. Revenue climbed to around $1.4 billion. But beneath the surface, margins were shrinking. Component costs were rising. Competition was intensifying. iRobot responded by ramping up inventory, expecting demand to continue. It did not. As supply chains normalized and stimulus money faded, sales slowed dramatically. In 2022, revenue fell to roughly $1.18 billion. The company posted significant losses. Market share continued slipping. Meanwhile, competitors were innovating faster and cheaper. That same year, Amazon announced it would acquire iRobot for $1.7 billion. The deal made strategic sense. Amazon wanted deeper integration with Alexa and access to the spatial mapping data Roombas collected inside millions of homes. The vision was clear: a smart home ecosystem where Amazon understood not just what you bought, but the layout of your living room. But regulators saw something else. The Federal Trade Commission and the European Commission launched investigations. They questioned whether Amazon could unfairly prioritize Roombas on its marketplace, and whether it would gain too much insight into consumer households. Privacy concerns exploded. Critics asked why one of the largest tech companies in the world should know the dimensions of your bedroom. The review dragged on for 18 months. During that time, iRobot was stuck in limbo. They could not radically restructure. They could not aggressively slash prices. They were waiting for rescue. Meanwhile, Roborock's revenue surged past $2 billion. Chinese brands gained global market share. Innovation cycles accelerated. iRobot was burning cash. In 2023, the company reported a net loss of over $285 million. They cut approximately 31% of their workforce. Founder Colin Angle stepped down as CEO after more than 3 decades. Then, in early 2024, the European Commission signaled it would block the Amazon acquisition. Amazon walked away, paying a $94 million termination fee. For Amazon, it was negligible. For iRobot, it was devastating. The stock plunged nearly 50% in a single day. Without Amazon's capital injection, iRobot faced mounting debt, declining sales, and intensifying price wars. Their once dominant US market share had dropped significantly, while competitors controlled large portions of Europe and Asia. Perhaps the most ironic twist is that the company that once sued Chinese manufacturers ended up outsourcing manufacturing to partners in Asia to cut costs. The innovator had become dependent on the ecosystem that outcompeted it. The core mistake was not inventing too early. It was relying too long on being the premium pioneer. iRobot believed patents would protect them. They believed brand recognition would justify higher prices. They believed mapping data would become a goldmine. Instead, hardware became commoditized, LiDAR became cheaper, and consumers prioritized features and price over legacy. iRobot created the robot vacuum industry. They proved people would trust a machine to roam freely inside their homes. They put over 40 million autonomous robots into circulation. But in doing so, they opened the floodgates. Once the technology matured and supply chains optimized globally, the barriers to entry collapsed. The downfall of iRobot is not just about one company. It is a warning about what happens when innovation becomes a commodity, when premium positioning meets price competition, when regulators block your exit strategy, and when the market you create evolves faster than you do. For years, Roomba symbolized the future, a self-driving vacuum quietly mapping your home. Today, the company fights to remain relevant in a world filled with smarter, cheaper, and faster rivals. They built the category, they dominated it, and then they lost control of it. That is the brutal cost of being first. Roomba wiped out investors, but number 9 didn't just fail. It was one of the biggest scams in Silicon Valley history, Theranos. Imagine a Silicon Valley startup with a $9 billion valuation, backed by media moguls and tech titans. This was Theranos, founded by 19-year-old Elizabeth Holmes. By 2014, she was a rock star CEO, courted by Warren Buffett and Rupert Murdoch. By 2022, Holmes was convicted of fraud and later sent to prison, all from a drop of blood. What happened? How did Theranos go from rock star hype to a multi-million-dollar scandal? Was it ambition, or was it straight-up deception? How did so many sophisticated investors get blindsided? The story is stranger than fiction, full of secret lab results, military claims, and shocking courtroom drama. Stay with me, because the deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. It all began in 2003, in a Stanford dorm room, with a simple yet audacious idea. Elizabeth Holmes, then a freshman, dropped out to launch Theranos, short for Therapeutic Diagnostics. She dreamed of a portable device that could do dozens of tests from one tiny blood drop. Imagine pricking your finger, and instead of a scarily large vial, a single drop is analyzed immediately for everything from cholesterol to infectious diseases. Faster results and cheaper costs. It was a humane, elegant pitch, and it landed. Holmes didn't just sell a product, she sold a future. On paper, Theranos' technology, especially its Edison device, looked revolutionary. Investors were mesmerized. She recruited an enviable board, full of respected names and former statesmen. High-profile investors like Rupert Murdoch and Betsy DeVos bought in. Forbes crowned Holmes the youngest self-made billionaire for her Theranos stake. Magazine covers followed the story. Even Hollywood leaned in. People wanted to believe her. The secrecy only made the story more intriguing. Holmes spoke with messianic confidence and grand promises, claiming she is already deployed on military bases. Those words echoed through boardrooms and cocktail parties. They sounded like the future. But underneath the gloss, engineers were whispering. The machines weren't behaving the way the pitch promised. Results were inconsistent, and yet the public story kept getting bigger. Holmes compared herself to iconic founders. Politicians bought the narrative. A young woman changing the world with a little device and a lot of charisma. By 2014, Theranos had become Silicon Valley's darling. The company reportedly raised nearly $700 million on the promise of single-drop testing. They announced plans to be in hundreds of Walgreens stores. The valuation? Roughly $9 billion. Wall Street-adjacent circles loved it. The company looked destined to rock the medical world. Headlines called Holmes a visionary. Inside the labs, however, things were murkier. Employees in the Newark lab found frequent errors. One lab worker told reporters flatly, "It's not consistent." Devices that were supposed to run dozens of assays from micro-volumes of blood were failing calibration checks. Rather than public peer review and published validation, Theranos relied on secrecy and internal demonstrations. Clinical validation, the gold standard in medicine, was replaced by glossy decks and private meetings. There were more warning signs. Theranos avoided standard corporate guardrails. It operated for years with no permanent CFO, board meetings were infrequent, and dissent was quietly discouraged. Employees who pushed back were sidelined. Some were even escorted out. The company cultivated loyalty and punished skepticism. Meanwhile, Holmes spun confident narratives. The military was using their machines, revenue was skyrocketing, and the technology was proprietary and perfect. Investors swallowed the story. Many admitted later that they never saw raw data or independent verification. They accepted demonstrations and Holmes's charisma. When billions of dollars are proposed to solve a huge problem, the fear of missing out can obscure basic diligence. Then, October 2015 happened. The Wall Street Journal published a devastating expose built on leaked internal documents and patient complaints. The headline landed like a grenade. Theranos' machines were unreliable. Patients' blood tests were often run on third-party machines, but labeled as Theranos. The machine Theranos made couldn't reliably perform the insane amount of tests the company claimed. Overnight, the narrative fractured. Regulators moved quickly. The FDA, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and other authorities opened probes. Walgreens ended the partnership. Investors' phones lit up with frantic calls. Employees who had sworn secrecy became whistleblowers. Lawsuits multiplied. The company that had promised to democratize healthcare was now fighting to just explain itself. In courtrooms and hearings, more details emerged. Presentations that claimed self-sufficiency were contradicted by evidence that Theranos relied on Siemens and other conventional analyzers for many tests. Claims about military deployment and massive near-term revenues were questioned. The myth of the miracle device was unraveling, thread by thread. By 2021, the US government had charged Elizabeth Holmes and former COO Sunny Balwani with fraud. Witness after witness took the stand. Former employees described a culture of fear and secrecy. Investors testified about the pitches they received, the promises made, and the data they never saw. Holmes testified she didn't intend to deceive. Prosecutors painted a different picture, a charismatic founder who chose deception over transparency. The narrative quickly shifted from just a failed tech startup to intentional fraud. On January 3rd, 2022, Holmes was convicted of 4 counts of investor fraud. The shockwaves were enormous. A once revered Silicon Valley icon had been found guilty in a high-profile case. What made this collapse possible? A few threads stand out. First, the board and the media. Theranos' board read like a who's who of establishment figures. Former secretaries of state, retired generals, luminaries whose names conferred trust. But many lacked deep expertise in clinical diagnostics. A prestigious name can lend credibility, but it doesn't replace domain experience. The media played its role too, spinning a rags-to-riches narrative that fit the zeitgeist. Profiles idolized Holmes. They rarely asked the hard technical questions that would have exposed flaws sooner. Second, secrecy as strategy. Theranos cloaked itself in secrecy, claiming trade secrets to avoid scrutiny. Steak knives drawers, NDAs, and restricted access weren't just quirks. They were deliberate shields. That culture stifled scientific debate, preventing independent verification and fostering an environment where bad data could be hidden rather than fixed. Third, investor blindness. Due diligence failed. Some investors admitted they relied on endorsements from others or on the charisma of the founder. They mistook bold narrative for evidence. When startups promise to change healthcare, the stakes are clinical, not just financial, and that demands verification beyond demos and decks. Fourth, gender and charisma. Holmes's identity as a young woman in tech gave her a compelling story in a male-dominated industry. Some analysts argue that her persona made critics less skeptical. She was perceived as a visionary rather than a con artist. That optics-driven dynamic is a cautionary tale. Charisma can be persuasive, but it must be backed by proof. And then, the human cost. This isn't just a finance or media scandal. People's health was on the line. There are accounts of patients receiving misleading results. Imagine being told you're disease-free when you're not, or vice versa. The consequences could be life-changing. For a company that sold trust, the betrayal was personal for many. Theranos' fall didn't just ruin reputations. It reshaped the conversation about startup hype and medical ethics. It forced investors and regulators to reconsider how they evaluate health tech. It made due diligence, scientific validation, clinical trials, peer review, non-negotiable. It reminded everyone that in medicine, claims must be validated in the light, not whispered about behind closed doors. Theranos is now a case study taught in business schools as a warning: how to fail spectacularly and how to behave when failure risks human lives. The cost of success here was nearly $1 billion raised, a $9 billion peak valuation, and shattered trust in a sector that desperately needs public confidence. If this deep dive left you stunned, outraged, or simply hungry for more, you're not alone. Theranos taught us a hard lesson about trust, verification, and the dangers of believing the story instead of the science. Theranos was one of Silicon Valley's biggest frauds, but number 8 turned the entire crypto world upside down. FTX. You think the most secure financial institutions could withstand a crisis? You think that a billionaire running a global empire built on digital gold had it all figured out? You're wrong. Picture this: a company once valued at over $30 billion, seen as the future of finance, evaporating almost overnight. Imagine millions of people logging in, watching their life savings disappear like mist. A hero of innovation turns out to be the architect of one of the largest financial crashes of the 21st century. What if I told you that trust, not failing markets, was the real currency that collapsed? This is the shocking story of FTX. FTX, short for Futures Exchange, was a cryptocurrency trading platform that exploded onto the scene in 2019, founded by young entrepreneurs Sam Bankman-Fried and Gary Wang. It promised a safe, easy, accessible gateway into the burgeoning world of cryptocurrencies. At its height, it had over 1 million users and was ranked as the 3rd largest exchange by trading volume in the world. FTX was headquartered in the Bahamas and marketed globally. Its native token, called FTT, became a cornerstone asset for the company, its investors, and users alike. Investors poured billions of dollars into FTX, believing it was a stable, trustworthy giant in the crypto ecosystem. But that image, as we'd soon find out, was built on shifting sands. FTX's rise was meteoric. It wasn't just an exchange, it was a brand. It signed sponsorship deals with major sports franchises and even appeared on mainstream media. Venture capital firms publicly backed the company, valuing it at up to $32 billion before collapse. Investors didn't just hand over funds, they handed over confidence. But beneath the surface, the company's corporate controls were dangerously weak or non-existent. When a new CEO was installed after bankruptcy, he described what he saw as the most complete failure of corporate controls and absence of trustworthy financial information in his decades of experience handling major bankruptcies. In plain terms, the books weren't audited properly, cash flows weren't transparent, and basic risk management systems didn't exist. One of the most significant flaws at the heart of FTX was its relationship with a sister company called Alameda Research, a trading firm also controlled by Sam Bankman-Fried. In theory, this could have been a legitimate working relationship, a trading desk helping to create liquidity for FTX's markets. In reality, investigators later found that huge amounts of FTX user funds were secretly moved to Alameda to cover its trading losses and other obligations. FTX and Alameda operated like two halves of a shell game. Customer deposits, money people thought was being held securely, were used as collateral for Alameda's high-risk bets and loans. When questioned later, bankruptcy court filings revealed that substantial portions of the company's assets had been lent out internally in ways that weren't disclosed to users or investors. In one stunning example, Alameda reportedly made a $1 billion loan back to its own CEO, according to court testimony after collapse. When an enterprise is built on such internal cross-leveraging without proper oversight, the moment of failure doesn't arrive slowly, it explodes. On November 2nd, 2022, a report from industry publication CoinDesk dropped a bombshell. Alameda Research held a substantial portion of its assets in FTT, the very token issued by FTX itself. This meant the value of Alameda's holdings was tightly tied to confidence in FTX, a circular dependency that should have raised red flags. Almost immediately, another crypto giant, Binance, announced it would sell its billions in FTT tokens, citing concerns over the balance sheet of FTX and its affiliated companies. That announcement triggered something akin to a bank run, but for the digital age. In just 72 hours, customers rushed to withdraw more than $8 billion from FTX. Except FTX didn't have that money. When traders and everyday users started redeeming their funds, FTX couldn't fulfill the requests. The platform simply didn't have enough liquidity, real, withdrawable assets on hand to cover all the promised balances. The greater the panic, the faster people withdrew, and the deeper the hole became. In a traditional bank run, depositors line up at brick-and-mortar branches. In FTX's case, users typed commands into apps and watched their funds vanish from the system. Some of those user deposit balances weren't even properly recorded on internal balance sheets. Others were mingled with trading assets at Alameda that had lost value. This mismatch between what was owed and what was actually held was gigantic. And when the truth came out, trust broke first, and then the market did. On November 11th, 2022, FTX, along with Alameda Research and over 100 related entities, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the United States. Sam Bankman-Fried resigned as CEO, replaced by turnaround specialist John J. Ray III. In his sworn declaration to the bankruptcy court, Ray would later say he had never seen such a complete failure of corporate controls, pointing to missing records, poor accounting, and lack of basic financial oversight. The bankruptcy process was vast, involving billions in missing assets, tangled international subsidiaries, and millions of users desperate for restitution. Many people whose savings were parked on the exchange found themselves with limited ability to withdraw their own funds, let alone recover losses. Less than a year after the collapse, Sam Bankman-Fried stood trial in the Southern District of New York. In November 2023, a federal jury found him guilty on 7 criminal counts, including wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy to launder money. Prosecutors argued he orchestrated a deliberate scheme to deceive customers, investors, and counterparties. In March 2024, Bankman-Fried was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison and ordered to forfeit more than $11 billion in assets, an amount designed to help repay those who lost funds through FTX's collapse. Several other executives, including the former head of Alameda Research, Caroline Ellison, also faced criminal charges, pleaded guilty, and served prison time for their roles in the scandal. Even law firms that had advised FTX were pulled into lawsuits from customers and regulators who claimed they helped enable regulatory loopholes. FTX's collapse was more than an isolated failure. It rippled through the global financial landscape. Market prices plunged. Major cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum saw significant price drops during the crisis, as fears sparked a sell-off. Regulatory scrutiny intensified. Policymakers worldwide pointed to FTX as evidence of the need for stronger oversight in crypto markets. The crisis became a central talking point in legislative discussions about crypto regulation, not just in the US, but internationally. Investor confidence shook. Institutional and retail investors alike became more cautious about unregulated exchanges and the safety of digital assets held off-chain. Some firms now require more transparent proof of reserves after similar failures. Everyday losses were real. For many individuals, losses weren't just abstract numbers. Thousands of retail investors around the world were left with thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up, often navigating confusing liquidation and claims processes. When we trace the collapse to its core mechanics, several themes emerge. Misuse of customer funds, lack of internal controls, conflicts of interest between related entities, and inadequate disclosures to users and investors. Regulators and prosecutors allege that the crisis was not merely a failed business, but a fraudulent scheme woven into the very fabric of FTX's operations. That allegation is reflected in the criminal convictions and massive forfeiture orders issued by the courts. The collapse left powerful lessons not just for the crypto sector, but for finance as a whole. Financial platforms must maintain clear segregation of customer assets. Transparent accounting and oversight aren't optional, they are fundamental. Rapid growth and public praise don't guarantee institutional integrity. Regulatory gaps can be exploited, and when they are, the costs are real. This wasn't just a company that failed, it was a warning sign that innovation without responsibility creates fragile foundations. As of today, FTX remains in bankruptcy liquidation, and recovery efforts continue to determine how much capital can ultimately be returned to creditors. Sam Bankman-Fried is serving a long federal prison sentence. The scandal remains one of the defining financial collapses of the digital asset era. The collapse of FTX wasn't just the fall of a company, it was the crumbling of a digital financial dream, influenced by unchecked ambition, inadequate controls, and misplaced trust. Millions were affected, billions were lost, and an entire industry was forced to confront what happens when innovation doesn't go hand in hand with sound financial governance. In the world of high finance, success is often celebrated. But as the FTX saga shows, the cost of success can be far greater when the foundations beneath it are unstable. FTX collapsed almost overnight, but number 7 went from the most hyped drink on earth to shelves full of unsold bottles. Prime. 6 months. That's all it took. A drink that had kids lining up for hours, parents paying $20 a bottle, supermarkets limiting purchases, shelves completely wiped clean. And then suddenly, the same product sitting untouched in clearance bins. From sold-out chaos to discount stickers, from viral obsession to overstock pallets. How does a brand go from impossible to find to impossible to sell? Was Prime just a hype cycle? Or was it a case study in what happens when influencer marketing scales faster than real demand? This is the story of how Prime went from sold out everywhere to struggling for momentum. Prime Hydration launched in January 2022, founded by YouTubers Logan Paul and KSI. Both creators had built massive global audiences over a decade. Combined, they commanded tens of millions of followers across YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. When they announced they were teaming up to create a sports drink, the launch wasn't just a product release, it was an internet event. From day one, Prime wasn't marketed like a traditional beverage. It was positioned as a cultural moment. The brand leaned heavily on social media virality, limited supply drops, influencer collaborations, and high-energy branding. Within weeks, demand exploded. In the United Kingdom especially, scenes inside supermarkets began circulating online. Teenagers ran through aisles. Stores introduced one bottle per customer rules. Some retailers locked Prime behind counters. Videos of near-empty shelves spread rapidly on TikTok, further amplifying the frenzy. Scarcity drove demand even higher. On resale platforms, bottles were listed for $15, $20, sometimes even more. In some cases, multi-packs were flipped for over $100. Whether those listings consistently sold at those prices is debated, but the perception was clear. Prime was valuable. That perception mattered more than the drink itself. By late 2022, Prime expanded distribution into the United States and additional international markets. Major retailers like Walmart, Target, Asda, and others began stocking it. The brand also secured major sports partnerships, including sponsorship deals with football clubs and high-profile athletes. One of the biggest visibility moments came when Prime became the official sports drink partner of Arsenal Football Club. The message was clear. This wasn't just a YouTuber side project. It was positioning itself as a legitimate competitor in the sports hydration industry. Estimates suggested the company generated hundreds of millions in retail sales during its first year. Logan Paul publicly stated that Prime did over $250 million in retail revenue in 2022 alone. By 2023, some reports suggested retail sales approached or exceeded $1 billion globally. While retail revenue is not the same as company profit, the scale of the brand's early success was undeniable. But rapid growth introduces risk. The first phase of Prime's success was driven by controlled scarcity. Limited supply kept demand artificially intense. When distribution widened dramatically in 2023, that scarcity disappeared, and with it, some of the urgency. Once shelves were consistently stocked, the buying behavior shifted. The product was no longer rare, it was available everywhere. The viral hunt element faded. At the same time, consumer curiosity settled. Many customers had tried the drink. Some became repeat buyers, others did not. Online, reviews were mixed. Some consumers praised the flavors. Others criticized the taste or sweetness. Prime's hydration formula used coconut water and artificial sweeteners, differentiating it from traditional sports drinks like Gatorade or Powerade. That difference attracted some customers, but didn't convert everyone. Meanwhile, competitors didn't stand still. The sports drink market is dominated by legacy brands with decades of distribution power, supply chain optimization, and brand loyalty. Competing long-term requires more than attention. It requires repeat consumption. By mid to late 2023, social media videos began circulating again, but this time with a different tone. Instead of empty shelves, viewers saw fully stocked displays. In some stores, pallets remained untouched for extended periods. In others, discount tags appeared. Clearance pricing began showing up in certain markets. The narrative online shifted quickly. The same internet that fueled Prime's rise began speculating about its decline. TikTok videos comparing sold-out chaos to stacked discount bins went viral. But what actually happened? First, oversupply. When a product scales aggressively based on explosive demand forecasts, production often ramps up significantly. Beverage manufacturing involves large batch commitments. Retail distribution agreements require inventory. If demand slows even slightly below projections, excess stock accumulates quickly. Second, hype cycles naturally cool. Influencer-driven products often experience extreme peaks followed by normalization. The initial sales wave includes loyal fans, collectors, and trend-driven buyers. Once that group is saturated, sales must be sustained by mainstream repeat customers. That transition is difficult. Third, scrutiny increased. In 2023, Prime faced regulatory attention regarding caffeine content in its energy drink line. US lawmakers raised concerns over marketing energy drinks to younger audiences. Some schools reportedly banned the drink. While the hydration version and energy version are different products, media coverage blurred the lines for some consumers. Additionally, certain consumer watchdog groups questioned labeling claims. Lawsuits were filed in some jurisdictions alleging misleading marketing regarding ingredients and benefits. It's important to note that lawsuits do not automatically imply wrongdoing, but legal headlines affect brand perception. Perception matters in consumer goods. By 2024, retail analysts noted that while Prime remained widely distributed, sales velocity had slowed compared to peak hype periods. In some markets, retailers reduced shelf space allocation. In others, promotional pricing became more common. That doesn't necessarily mean the brand failed. It means it entered the reality phase of consumer packaged goods, where repeat purchase rate, not virality, determines survival. Logan Paul and KSI continued promoting the product across social platforms, but audience behavior evolves. What once felt like an exclusive drop became just another option in the beverage aisle. There's also a larger macroeconomic factor. Consumer spending tightened globally in 2023 and 2024 amid inflation pressures. Premium-priced beverages face more resistance in tighter economic environments. When a product is priced above competitors, it must justify that difference through taste, function, or brand loyalty. Prime's early success was driven by brand loyalty. Sustained success requires habitual consumption. Some reports suggested that certain international expansions were scaled back or adjusted based on demand. Retail clearance activity, while not universal, became visible enough online to shape a broader narrative. And in modern markets, narrative spreads faster than quarterly sales data. So, did Prime collapse? No formal bankruptcy, no public confirmation of financial distress, no official announcement of failure. But the visible shift from scarcity to surplus tells a different story. One about the volatility of influencer-powered product launches. The beverage industry operates on thin margins and massive volume. Brands like Coca-Cola and PepsiCo dominate through logistics, retail relationships, and decades of consumer behavior research. Breaking into that system is possible, but sustaining momentum requires more than viral marketing. Prime proved that attention can generate hundreds of millions in sales rapidly. It also demonstrated how quickly momentum can normalize once novelty fades. This isn't necessarily a downfall, it's a case study in scale. When supply expands faster than organic demand stabilizes, shelves fill. When shelves fill, urgency drops. When urgency drops, price promotions begin. And once discounting becomes common, the premium perception weakens. That sequence can happen within a year. Prime's journey highlights a broader trend, the power and limits of influencer commerce. Social media can ignite demand faster than traditional advertising ever could. But it can't guarantee repeat behavior. Sustainable brands are built on habit. The early phase of Prime relied on excitement, collectability, and cultural relevance. The later phase required consistency, flavor preference, and functional loyalty. The shift from sold out to discount bins wasn't a single event. It was a gradual transition from hype-driven demand to market-tested reality. For Logan Paul and KSI, Prime remains one of the most successful influencer product launches ever. Few creator-led brands reach nine-figure retail sales so quickly. But the story also serves as a reminder. Viral growth is not the same as durable growth. In consumer goods, attention opens the door. Operations determine what happens next. As retail shelves stabilized and social media moved on to the next trend, Prime entered its next chapter. One defined not by chaos and resale listings, but by standard competitive pressures. The beverage aisle is crowded. Shelf space is earned weekly. Brands that can't maintain turnover lose positioning. Whether Prime evolves into a long-term player or remains a case study in influencer hype cycles will depend on repeat purchase behavior, distribution strategy, and brand management in the years ahead. What is clear is this: The journey from impossible to find to hard to move can happen faster than most people expect. In business, explosive success creates equally explosive expectations. And sometimes the cost of success isn't failure, it's sustainability. Prime proved hype can fade fast, but number 6 turned viral success into a full-blown business disaster. Mr. Beast Burger. It only took 3 years for Mr. Beast's viral burger empire to go from one of the fastest growing restaurant launches in internet history to a public legal battle and an attempted shutdown. It was supposed to change fast food forever. No restaurants, no storefronts, no overhead. Just the biggest YouTuber on the planet and an army of delivery drivers. Within days, orders flooded in. Thousands of locations, millions in revenue. A burger empire built entirely on the internet. But just as quickly as it exploded, the cracks began to show. Complaints, refunds, lawsuits, and eventually, a public fallout between Mr. Beast and the company running the entire operation. How does a brand go from viral goldmine to being publicly disowned by its own founder? This is how Beast Burger fell apart. In December 2020, Mr. Beast, real name Jimmy Donaldson, launched Mr. Beast Burger in partnership with a company called Virtual Dining Concepts. The concept was simple and at the time, revolutionary. Instead of building restaurants, Beast Burger would operate as a ghost kitchen brand. Existing restaurants across the United States would prepare Beast Burger menu items out of their own kitchens. Orders would come through delivery apps like Uber Eats and DoorDash. This allowed the brand to scale instantly. Within months, Mr. Beast Burger expanded to over 1,000 locations across North America, Europe, and beyond. At one point, reports suggested it had grown to more than 1,700 virtual locations worldwide. For a food brand launched during a global pandemic, that scale was unprecedented. The marketing engine behind it was obvious. Mr. Beast wasn't just a YouTuber, he was one of the most viewed creators on Earth. His launch video alone generated tens of millions of views. Fans weren't just buying burgers, they were buying into the Mr. Beast brand. And early numbers looked strong. In its first few months, the company reportedly generated millions in revenue. The low overhead model meant rapid expansion without traditional franchise build-out costs. But the ghost kitchen model had a hidden flaw: control. Because Beast Burger didn't operate its own kitchens, it relied on third-party restaurants to prepare the food correctly. That meant quality varied wildly depending on location. Almost immediately, customer complaints began surfacing online. Undercooked burgers, burnt buns, missing items, sloppy packaging, cold food. On social media, customers posted photos of inconsistent meals. Some locations delivered acceptable quality, others did not. When you attach one of the biggest creator brands in the world to a product, expectations are high, and inconsistency spreads fast online. As the brand expanded aggressively, quality control became harder to manage. Virtual Dining Concepts handled operations, logistics, and partnerships. Mr. Beast licensed his name and promoted the brand. But as complaints mounted, the separation between brand and operations blurred in the eyes of customers. To the public, it was Mr. Beast's burger. Behind the scenes, tension was growing. By 2022 and into 2023, reviews across platforms showed a noticeable pattern: highly inconsistent ratings depending on city and kitchen partner. Some locations performed well, others damaged the brand. The ghost kitchen model, while efficient for scaling, made standardization extremely difficult. Unlike McDonald's or other traditional chains that control supply chains, training, and facilities, Beast Burger relied on independent operators with varying standards. And then the situation escalated. In 2023, Mr. Beast filed a lawsuit against Virtual Dining Concepts, seeking to terminate the partnership. In legal filings, he alleged that the company prioritized rapid expansion over food quality, harming his brand reputation. He claimed the business had irreparably damaged his brand through poor execution and lack of quality control. Virtual Dining Concepts responded with its own countersuit, alleging breach of contract and claiming the brand generated over $100 million in revenue. The partnership had turned into a legal battle. Publicly, Mr. Beast stated he wanted to shut down Beast Burger because he could no longer ensure product quality. He emphasized that he had little operational control under the agreement structure. For a creator whose brand is built on high production value and audience trust, that lack of control was a major risk. And here's where the real business lesson emerges. Beast Burger's explosive launch was powered by attention, not infrastructure. The model allowed instant global scale, but it sacrificed operational oversight. In traditional franchising, growth is slower because systems must be standardized. Ghost kitchens invert that formula. Scale first, refine later. But in food service, inconsistency can permanently damage perception. As legal disputes unfolded, the brand's momentum slowed. Locations gradually reduced. Public promotion decreased. Eventually, Mr. Beast shifted focus heavily toward another venture, Feastables, his snack and chocolate brand. Unlike Beast Burger, Feastables operates through more traditional manufacturing and distribution channels, allowing greater quality control. The contrast between the two ventures is striking. One relied on decentralized kitchens and third-party execution. The other relies on centralized production and packaged goods distribution. One faced lawsuits and public shutdown attempts. The other expanded into major retailers like Walmart and international markets. Beast Burger didn't fail because there was no demand. It failed because demand alone isn't enough. Operational consistency determines longevity. The ghost kitchen model itself isn't inherently flawed. Many delivery-only brands operate successfully. But attaching a global creator brand to a decentralized system magnifies every mistake. When a random local kitchen overcooks fries, it's a bad review. When that kitchen is representing one of the largest YouTubers in the world, it becomes a viral thread. By late 2023, Beast Burger's future remained uncertain amid ongoing legal disputes. Mr. Beast publicly distanced himself from the brand, stating he wanted it shut down. For fans, the story felt abrupt. For business analysts, it felt predictable. Rapid scaling without operational control creates structural fragility. And in this case, the very feature that made Beast Burger revolutionary, its ability to launch thousands of locations instantly, also made it impossible to manage consistently. It was a digital-first fast food empire built at internet speed. But restaurants don't operate at internet speed. They operate on supply chains, staff training, quality checks, and process repetition. When those layers aren't unified under one system, cracks form. Beast Burger was never a traditional restaurant chain. It was a licensing machine powered by attention. And attention can build a brand overnight, but it cannot cook the burger. The legal battle highlighted another key risk in creator-led ventures: partnership structure. When creators license their name rather than control operations, they trade ownership for scale. That trade can be profitable. It can also limit control when things go wrong. Beast Burger reportedly generated tens of millions in revenue during its peak. But revenue alone doesn't equal brand equity. For Mr. Beast, long-term brand trust likely outweighed short-term licensing income. That's why the public attempt to exit the partnership became so visible. This wasn't a bankruptcy collapse. It was a structural breakdown between brand and execution. A viral empire that couldn't maintain uniform standards across hundreds of independent kitchens. And in modern markets, inconsistency spreads faster than advertising. The story of Beast Burger isn't about burgers. It's about scale without control. It's about the difference between audience power and operational power. And it's about what happens when internet momentum collides with real-world logistics. Because building hype is easy for someone with 100 million subscribers. Maintaining operational excellence across 1,000 kitchens is something else entirely. The fall of Beast Burger serves as a reminder. Virality can launch a company, but infrastructure sustains it. And when those two forces aren't aligned, even the biggest names on the internet can't prevent the cracks from widening. In business, growth is impressive. Control is essential. And sometimes, the cost of success is realizing that scale without structure is temporary. Mr. Beast Burger collapsed under its own hype. But number 5 shows how a billion-dollar shopping app can completely lose the internet. Wish. In the 2000s, Wish ads were everywhere. Not just everywhere either, they were unavoidable. You'd be scrolling Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and suddenly you'd see something so strange you couldn't look away. A $3 Easy Fart shorts, shocks with toes for 20 cents, a cat mask that looked like it belonged in a horror movie, and products so bizarre they felt like they were designed by aliens. And that was the point. Wish didn't just sell cheap stuff, it sold curiosity. It sold the feeling of, what is this, and why is it so cheap? Weird Wish ads became its own internet genre. But the strangest part of the story isn't the products. It's the fact that behind all the chaos was a company that, at its peak, was worth billions, backed by major investors, and even had a secret meeting with Jeff Bezos. Wish looked like it was going to become the next Amazon. Instead, it became one of the biggest e-commerce collapses of the modern internet. The stock fell almost 99%. The user base collapsed. The brand became a meme. The entire empire was sold off for pocket change compared to what it could have been. So how did Wish go from unstoppable to irrelevant? To understand Wish, you need to understand one simple idea. Wish was never really an e-commerce company. It was an advertising company, and it was built by a man who knew exactly how to hack your brain. Wish's real name was Context Logic, and it was founded in 2010 by a former Google engineer named Piotr Szulczewski. Piotr didn't work at Google doing random stuff either. He worked on one of the most powerful systems in the world, Google Ads. He helped build algorithms that predict what people want, what they click, what they buy, and what they can't resist. When he left Google, he spent months coding a new system that could predict someone's interests just by tracking browsing behavior. In 2010, that was cutting edge. This was before TikTok algorithms took over the planet, and before your phone seemed to read your mind. Piotr's idea was simple. If you can predict what people want, you can sell them anything. Investors loved it. He raised funding, and then something crazy happened. Facebook offered him about $20 million to integrate his algorithm into their ad system. That's a life-changing offer, the kind of offer most founders take instantly. But Piotr said no. Investors were furious. One investor reportedly stormed into his office and screamed at him. Piotr wasn't thinking small, and he wasn't trying to cash out. He thought he could build something massive, so he pivoted, and this is where Wish gets weird. The first version of Wish wasn't even a shopping website. It was basically a digital wish list called Wishwall. You would scroll through products, but you couldn't even buy them. You'd just wish them. It was like window shopping turned into an addiction, and it worked. People loved scrolling. Piotr realized something important. Most people don't shop like robots. They shop emotionally. They shop impulsively. They shop when something feels exciting. So he started emailing merchants directly, promising them access to a huge pool of buyers. But there was a condition. They had to cut prices by 10 to 20%. Here's the shocking part. Wish wasn't even taking commission at first. That's insane. They were connecting buyers and sellers, but not taking a cut. Because Wish wasn't focused on profits. Wish was focused on growth. Growth over everything. Wish started exploding. Cheap manufacturers, mostly in China, could list products for almost nothing. Wish didn't touch inventory. Wish didn't run warehouses. Wish didn't ship anything. Wish was just the middleman, a giant digital flea market, but with one advantage: it had the best algorithm in the game. Wish wasn't winning because it had better products. It was winning because it could put the right weird product in front of the right person at the right time. By the mid-2000s, Wish became one of the biggest shopping apps on Earth. It was described as the dollar store of the internet, but the truth was darker. It was the casino of the internet. It wasn't designed for customer satisfaction, it was designed for clicks. And this is where the story takes a turn. Because Wish was growing so fast that the biggest companies in the world wanted to buy it. In 2016, Piotr was invited to a secret meeting at Amazon headquarters. A secret meeting with Jeff Bezos. Lawyers were present, non-disclosure agreements were signed, and that basically tells you everything. Amazon was considering acquiring Wish. The rumored offer was around $10 billion. $10 billion for a company that investors had valued around $3 billion. That's not just a good offer, that's a dream offer. And Bezos wasn't the only one interested. Alibaba also reportedly wanted Wish in the same ballpark. $10 billion. Two giants fighting over it, and Piotr turned them down. He believed Wish could become worth far more. According to insiders, Piotr believed he could scale Wish to something like 1/4 of Walmart's revenue. He wasn't thinking 10 billion, he was thinking 100 billion. And for a while, it looked like he might be right. Wish revenue surged. In 2018, Wish hit around $1.9 billion in revenue. The app became one of the most downloaded shopping apps in the world. Wish claimed hundreds of millions of users. It was becoming the third biggest e-commerce marketplace in the US by sales. Every year, it seemed like they were adding another 100 million users. Then came the IPO. In 2020, Wish went public and raised about $1.1 billion. At its peak, Wish was valued around $14 billion. Piotr looked like a genius. The investors who screamed at him years earlier looked stupid. Wish was everywhere, and that's exactly when the trap closed. Because the same strategy that made Wish famous is what destroyed it: advertising. The Wish algorithm was powerful, but it had one weakness. It rewarded attention, not satisfaction. If you stop scrolling because you see something insane, that's a win. If you click because you can't believe it's real, that's a win. If you share it with your friends because it's hilarious, that's a win. Even if you never buy it, even if it's a scam, even if it makes you hate the platform. Wish ads were designed to be unskippable, not because they were good, but because they were unbelievable. Wish spent a ridiculous amount of money to make sure you saw them. At one point, Wish was reportedly one of the biggest advertisers on Facebook and Instagram, one of the biggest on Google too. They were buying attention at an industrial scale, and it worked. Wish became the app you couldn't escape. But behind the scenes, Wish had a problem so extreme it almost doesn't sound real. Wish wasn't just unprofitable, it was catastrophically unprofitable. At times, Wish had profit margins around -100%. That means for every $1 Wish made, it spent $2. The more revenue it generated, the more money it lost. It was like pouring water into a bucket with a hole the size of a fist, and instead of fixing the hole, Wish just tried to pour faster. But you can't outgrow math, you can't outgrow reality, and the moment the internet changed, Wish was finished. Then came 2020, the pandemic. Lockdowns. Online shopping exploded, and most people would assume that would be perfect for Wish, but it wasn't. Because the pandemic also triggered something else, a war for attention. Every company on Earth moved online at the same time, and that meant ad prices skyrocketed. The cost of buying clicks went up, the cost of buying customers went up, and the cost of survival went up. Wish's entire business model depended on cheap advertising. Wish didn't have loyal customers, it had impulse customers. People weren't loyal to Wish, they were loyal to cheap deals. And when ad prices went up, Wish's engine started breaking. Their biggest strength became a weakness, and the numbers got ugly fast. In 2020, Wish hit revenue around $2.5 billion. That was their peak, and it came with a loss of over $600 million. Then, revenue started falling, and it didn't stop. Wish revenue dropped by about $500 million, then dropped again, then collapsed even harder. But the money wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what people experienced when they actually used Wish. Wish didn't just sell cheap stuff, it became infamous for selling scams, fake products, misleading listings, items that looked nothing like the photos, and delivery times so long it felt like your package was being carried across the ocean by a single exhausted pigeon. People ordered phones and got plastic toys. People ordered shoes and got something that looked like it came from a costume shop. The platform became flooded with sellers who had one goal: take the money and disappear. And Wish didn't stop them. In fact, it almost felt like Wish was built to enable it. Wish reportedly had extremely weak customer support. Refunds could take months, complaints went nowhere, and scams stayed active. Wish wasn't optimized for trust. It was optimized for growth, for clicks, for installs, for dopamine, not for quality and not for long-term success. This is the part where the audience turns on you, because once customers feel scammed, they don't just leave, they warn everyone else. And Wish became a meme for being untrustworthy, a joke, a punchline. Then the final boss arrived, Temu. In 2022, Temu launched, and Temu wasn't some random startup. It was backed by Pinduoduo, a giant Chinese e-commerce company with massive resources. Temu was basically Wish but upgraded. Better marketing, more legitimacy, more money, better execution. Temu did what Wish did, but louder. They flooded social media with ads, but this time they didn't look like a shady dollar store, they looked like the future. Temu even ran Super Bowl ads. Wish never had that kind of firepower. Wish was already bleeding. Temu walked in and finished the job. By this point, Wish was collapsing. The stock had fallen over 99% from its peak. Users disappeared. Monthly active users reportedly dropped from over 100 million to a tiny fraction of that. Wish went from being a global shopping giant to a ghost town. Employees were laid off. Executives reshuffled. Pyotr Shulchevsky stepped down as CEO. The man who turned down $10 billion from Jeff Bezos was now watching his empire crumble. Then came the ending that feels almost cruel. In early 2024, Context Logic sold Wish, not for billions, not for even $1 billion. Wish was sold for around $173 million. That's not a typo. A company once rumored to be worth $10 billion sold for about $173 million. It's the kind of collapse that makes investors sick. It gets even worse. The buyer, Qoo10, a Southeast Asian e-commerce company, later ran into serious financial trouble themselves. So Wish didn't even get acquired by a stable giant. It got acquired by another sinking ship. Just like that, Wish was gone. Not with a bang, but with a discount. Here's the real lesson. Wish didn't die because people stopped wanting cheap products. Temu proved they still do. Wish died because it built a business on attention, not trust. It built a machine that could make you click, but it couldn't make you stay. In business, that's everything. Clicks are temporary. Trust is permanent. Wish spent years training customers to treat it like a joke, so when competition arrived, there was no loyalty to protect them. No moat, no love, no reason to come back. Just memories of scams, delays, and disappointment. The craziest part is that Wish actually had real technology. It had one of the most powerful product recommendation engines of its era. It had massive user data. It had the kind of growth most startups would kill for, and it still failed, because it never built the one thing that matters more than growth, a good experience. Wish proved you can buy attention, you can buy installs, you can buy hype, but you cannot buy loyalty. If your business model depends on tricking people into clicking, eventually they stop clicking, and when they stop clicking, the whole empire collapses. So the next time you see a platform explode overnight with insane ads and insane deals, remember Wish, because the internet rewards growth, but it punishes greed. And Wish is what happens when a company chases growth so hard, it forgets what it's supposed to be building. Wish lost the trust of millions of online shoppers. But number 4 shows how even a 100-year-old giant can make a huge mistake. Gillette. January 13th, 2019. A normal Sunday. The kind of day where millions of men wake up, make coffee, scroll their phone, and get ready for the week. And somewhere in that routine, without even thinking, they reach for something that has been part of their life for decades. A razor. Not just any razor, a Gillette. Because for more than 100 years, Gillette was not just a product. It was a ritual, a brand passed from father to son like tradition. But on that morning, Gillette pressed upload on one single video, and within hours, a 117-year legacy was on fire. Men started filming themselves throwing away their razors, smashing them, burning them, and switching brands in real time. And by Monday morning, executives at Procter & Gamble were watching something no company ever wants to witness. Their customers turning against them with a level of rage that looked personal. And the craziest part is that this was not caused by a competitor. It was not a scandal. It was not a defective product. It was their own ad. This is the story of how one of the most powerful brands on earth triggered a consumer backlash so intense, it ended in an $8 billion write-down. And if you want more stories where a single decision nukes an empire, hit subscribe right now, because the next one is even worse. To understand why this ad hit like a nuclear bomb, you need to understand what Gillette used to be. Gillette was founded in 1901 by King Camp Gillette, and he did not just invent a razor, he invented one of the most genius business models in history. Sell the handle cheap and make the money on the blades. The razor was the entry, the blades were the addiction. The more men shaved, the more Gillette printed money. Gillette did not just win the razor market, they owned it. By the time most brands were fighting for survival, Gillette had become synonymous with masculinity itself. They sponsored sports, plastered their name across stadiums, and became the razor of champions. Then they created one of the most iconic slogans in marketing history, "The best a man can get." That slogan was not just a tagline, it was a psychological weapon. It implied something deeper. If you buy Gillette, you are not just shaving, you are upgrading yourself. You are becoming better. And for decades, that message worked like magic. Gillette became so valuable that in 2005, Procter & Gamble bought the company for $57 billion. $57 billion. That is not an acquisition. That is a declaration that they owned the king. And for years, Gillette delivered. It was a cash machine inside the P&G empire. But then the world started changing, and Gillette started bleeding. By the mid-2000s, Gillette faced a brutal reality. Men were shaving less. Beards were in. Stubble became fashionable. Shaving daily was no longer the default for a massive chunk of the population. Then it got worse, because Gillette had a new enemy. Not another razor brand, but a new type of business model: subscriptions. Dollar Shave Club exploded by offering cheaper razors delivered straight to your door. Harry's followed, and the message was simple: why are you paying premium prices for a razor? Gillette's pricing model started to look outdated. So even though Gillette still had the biggest name, the market was shifting beneath them. And when companies feel threatened, they usually do one of two things: they improve the product or they change the message. Gillette chose to change the message. In 2019, they decided to modernize the slogan that built their empire. What could go wrong? Everything. On January 13, 2019, Gillette uploaded a nearly 2-minute video titled, "We Believe, the Best Men Can Be." Not the best a man can get, not shaving, not innovation, not quality, not performance. This was not an ad about razors. This was an ad about morality. And from the first seconds, it felt like a lecture. The ad showed scenes of men catcalling, bullying, fighting, harassing women, behaving like predators, and teaching boys toxic behavior. And the core message was basically that men needed to do better. Now here's the problem. Gillette's customer base did not watch that and think, "Wow, thank you, Gillette." They watched it and thought, "Are you talking about me?" And that emotional reaction is what killed them. Because once your customer feels attacked, it is not marketing anymore. It is war. Gillette expected praise. Instead, they got an avalanche. Within 24 hours, the ad had millions of views, and the engagement ratio was horrifying. The dislike count exploded. The comment section turned into a battlefield. People were not just annoyed, they were offended. And then it became viral. The hashtag Boycott Gillette started spreading. Reaction videos flooded YouTube. Creators filmed themselves dumping Gillette products in the trash. Some burned them. Some smashed them. Some dramatically switched to competitors on camera. And that is when the algorithm turned against Gillette. Because YouTube does not care about your brand, it cares about attention. And outrage is attention on steroids. So the ad did not just trend, it became a cultural event. News outlets started covering it. Podcasts debated it. Political commentators jumped in. And suddenly, Gillette was not a razor company anymore. It became a symbol. And once a brand becomes a symbol, you lose control. Here is what most people miss. Brands can survive bad PR. They can survive angry tweets. They can survive memes. But they cannot survive one thing: people switching brands. Razors are not like iPhones. There is no ecosystem. There is no lock-in. If you are angry at Gillette, you can replace them in 5 minutes. And that is exactly what happened. Competitors benefited instantly. Dollar Shave Club, Harry's, Schick, even generic store brands suddenly looked like the safe option. Then came the number that proved this was not just internet drama. In 2019, Procter & Gamble announced an $8 billion write-down related to Gillette. $8 billion. That is not a marketing loss. That is not a bad quarter. That is a corporate funeral. Now, P&G said the write-down was tied to competition, pricing pressure, and market conditions. And yes, those issues were real. But the timing is what matters. Because the ad did not happen in a vacuum. It happened when Gillette was already vulnerable, already declining, already being undercut, and already fighting for relevance. And instead of stabilizing, they poured gasoline on the fire. This was not just politics. This was a branding failure. Gillette had spent decades building an identity around strength, confidence, performance, masculinity, and aspiration. Then, in one video, they flipped the message into "men are the problem." And whether you agree with the message or not, from a business perspective, it was suicidal. Because you do not grow by insulting the people who pay your bills. You do not modernize by making your customers feel like villains. You do not win by turning your slogan into an accusation. Gillette's slogan used to say, "You can be the best." The new slogan felt like, "You are the worst." And once the customer interprets it that way, it is over. Now here is where this story becomes legendary. Because most brands, when backlash hits, do damage control. They apologize, they pivot, they soften the message, they try to win back the audience. But Gillette's leadership did not retreat. They doubled down. They defended the campaign publicly. They positioned it as a moral stance. And to a lot of customers, that confirmed their fear. Gillette was not listening. Gillette was not sorry. Gillette was basically saying, if you are offended, good. And that is the moment the backlash became permanent. Because consumers can forgive mistakes, but they do not forgive arrogance. Gillette did not just lose sales, they lost something far more valuable: trust. Gillette used to be a brand people did not even think about. It was automatic, it was default, like Coca-Cola, Nike, or McDonald's. And when you lose default status, you lose the easiest money in business. Because now every purchase becomes a decision. And when consumers start deciding price matters, alternatives matter, and convenience matters, Gillette became just another option, not the option. And in consumer goods, that is the beginning of death. This is why this story belongs on a channel called Cost of Success. Because Gillette was not a struggling brand trying to survive. Gillette was a king, a monopoly-level brand, a cultural icon. And that is what made the mistake so deadly. When you are winning, you start believing your customers will never leave. You start believing your brand is bigger than the product. You start believing you can reshape culture. And sometimes you forget the most important rule in business. Your customers do not owe you loyalty. You owe them value. You owe them respect. And you owe them a reason to stay. Gillette did not just make a controversial ad. They made a strategic mistake. They traded customer loyalty for cultural approval. And the market responded instantly. So here is the story in one sentence. Gillette built a 100-year empire by telling men they could be the best, and then nearly destroyed it by telling men they were the problem. And whether you loved the ad or hated it, the numbers do not lie. When an empire takes an $8 billion hit, that is not a debate. That is a disaster. Gillette damaged a legendary brand. But number 3 ignored the future completely, and it cost them everything. Blockbuster. Blockbuster had the chance to buy Netflix for $50 million. They said no. 10 years later, Netflix was worth billions, and Blockbuster was bankrupt. This is the story of how a $5 billion empire laughed at the future and disappeared. Before streaming, before algorithms, and before the "Are you still watching?" message, there was Friday night. Families would pile into the car and drive to the glowing blue and yellow Blockbuster sign. The automatic doors would slide open, and you would smell plastic cases and carpet. Rows of movies stretched across the walls. New releases were displayed at the front. Video games sat behind the counter. There was always that small anxiety that your movie might already be rented out. Blockbuster was not just a store, it was a ritual. At its peak in the early 2000s, Blockbuster had over 9,000 stores worldwide and more than 60,000 employees. Millions of customers visited every week. The company generated over $5 billion in annual revenue. It completely dominated home entertainment. Then the internet happened. Blockbuster made money in 2 major ways: rentals and late fees. Late fees alone generated hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Forgetting to return a movie on time was one of Blockbuster's most profitable systems. Customers hated late fees, but they tolerated them because there was no alternative. Until 1997. That was the year 2 entrepreneurs founded a small DVD by mail company called Netflix. The concept sounded strange. You would order movies online and wait days for delivery. There was no store to walk through and no impulse rentals at the counter. Blockbuster executives were not concerned. They had brand recognition, retail dominance, strong cash flow, and a system that worked. Netflix looked like a niche experiment. In 2000, Netflix was struggling. The dot-com bubble had burst, and the company was losing money. So its founders approached Blockbuster with an offer. They suggested that Blockbuster buy Netflix for $50 million. Blockbuster executives listened. Then they laughed. $50 million for a mail-order DVD startup seemed absurd. Blockbuster made more than that in late fees alone. The meeting ended without a deal. Blockbuster believed it had already won. But what they failed to understand was that Netflix was not competing on stores. It was competing on convenience. And convenience almost always wins. As broadband internet expanded and DVD players replaced VHS tapes, e-commerce slowly became normal. Blockbuster saw these as small trends rather than serious threats. Their business model was built around physical retail locations, foot traffic, and impulse purchases. Streaming did not yet seem viable. So they continued expanding stores and doubling down on what had worked before. Meanwhile, Netflix evolved. The company eliminated late fees and introduced a subscription model. Customers could pay one monthly price and rent unlimited DVDs, keeping them as long as they wanted without penalties. For customers who were tired of late fees, this felt revolutionary. Netflix began to grow. Blockbuster did notice the growth. They were not completely blind. They launched their own DVD by mail service and eventually eliminated late fees in 2005. However, late fees had been massively profitable. Removing them hurt revenue immediately, and franchise owners were furious. Profit margins shrank. Internal confusion spread. Was Blockbuster a retail store chain or a subscription service? The company struggled to define itself. Netflix did not have this identity crisis. It had one model and one direction. There was another major difference between the two companies: debt. In 2004, Blockbuster was spun off from its parent company, carrying nearly $1 billion in debt. That debt limited flexibility. Blockbuster could not experiment freely or absorb long-term losses. It needed consistent cash flow to make debt payments. Netflix did not have thousands of physical stores. It did not have massive lease agreements or retail overhead. Blockbuster, on the other hand, was tied to bricks and mortar. Every month, store leases cost millions of dollars, even if customer traffic slowed. Then streaming arrived. When Netflix introduced streaming, the catalog was small and the video quality was limited. It did not look revolutionary at first. However, it worked. Movies played instantly. There was no waiting, no late fees, and no driving to a store. Blockbuster underestimated streaming again. Bandwidth seemed limited, and DVDs were still popular. Streaming looked like a side feature rather than the future. But technology improves gradually and then suddenly. By the time Blockbuster realized streaming was the future of entertainment, Netflix already had a significant head start.
There is another part of the story that often gets overlooked. Blockbuster had multiple opportunities to adapt, and each time it hesitated. In the early 2000s, the internet was no longer a tiny experiment. Amazon was expanding rapidly. Apple was rising. Digital platforms were gaining power. Change was clearly happening. Inside Blockbuster, however, executives remained focused on late fees. Late fees generated around $800 million per year. That revenue was predictable. Customers would forget to return movies, pay penalties, get frustrated, and still come back. The entire system was built around inconvenience. Netflix removed that inconvenience. There were no late fees, no awkward moments at the counter, and no driving across town. There were simply movies delivered to your door and eventually streamed instantly. Blockbuster eventually announced that it was eliminating late fees, but the change was not as simple as it sounded. Customers were still charged in different ways, and many felt misled. The company appeared to be protecting revenue rather than fully embracing change. Meanwhile, Netflix was building infrastructure and preparing for a digital future. Blockbuster did launch its own streaming service in 2007, the same year Netflix expanded streaming. However, Blockbuster was already drowning in debt and declining store traffic. Protecting thousands of physical locations meant protecting rent, staff, and inventory. Those once valuable stores were quickly becoming liabilities. Between 2007 and 2010, the decline accelerated. Store traffic dropped, revenue fell, debt remained heavy. Redbox kiosks appeared in supermarkets, offering cheap and convenient rentals. Netflix subscriptions continued climbing. Blockbuster tried to pivot toward streaming, but it was too late. The company was bleeding cash. In 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. A company that had once employed 60,000 people collapsed. Thousands of stores closed. Employees lost jobs. Franchise owners lost investments. From 9,000 stores, only one remains today in Bend, Oregon. The final store operates as a nostalgic landmark rather than a business powerhouse. Tourists take photos and buy merchandise. It is charming, but it also represents something much larger. Blockbuster did not fail simply because Netflix was smarter. It failed because it protected the present instead of investing in the future. Late fees were profitable. Retail stores were comfortable. Dominance felt secure. Competing seriously with Netflix would have required shutting stores, canceling leases, accepting short-term losses, and disrupting its own model. Few companies willingly destroy their current success to build a new future. It is easier to delay. It is easier to believe you are still winning. It is easier to laugh at a smaller competitor. until you are not winning anymore. $50 million is what Netflix asked for. Today, Netflix has been valued in the hundreds of billions. Blockbuster could have owned it. Instead, it dismissed it. The cost of arrogance was everything. Blockbuster's story is not just about technology. It is about hesitation. It is about comfort. It is about protecting predictable revenue instead of embracing uncomfortable change. The most dangerous competitor is not the one doing what you do slightly better. It is the one changing the rules entirely. Blockbuster optimized physical retail. Netflix optimized digital convenience. When the world shifted, Blockbuster was too heavy to move. That is how giants fall. Not in a single dramatic moment, but through small decisions repeated over time. Blockbuster ignored the future. But number 2 was supposed to be the future. Segway. They told us it would replace transportation in cities. Before anyone even knew what it was, billionaires were investing. Tech insiders were calling it bigger than the internet. Some people said it would change humanity as much as the car. The inventor kept it secret for months. When it was finally revealed, it was a bulky 2-wheeled scooter. And within a few years, the device that was predicted to sell 10 million units would struggle to sell even a fraction of that. This is the story of how mystery became the product, and how Segway Inc. became one of the most anticipated inventions in modern history, all to just collapse due to its own expectations. In the late 1990s, inventor Dean Kamen was already famous. He wasn't just some random startup founder. He had created the iBot mobility system, a revolutionary wheelchair that could climb stairs. He had founded First Robotics. He had credibility. So when the news started spreading in 1999 that Kamen was working on something so revolutionary it would redefine the way people got around cities, people listened. Major investors like John Doerr from Kleiner Perkins poured money in before the public even knew what the product was. Even Steve Jobs reportedly said it was going to be as big as the PC. Jeff Bezos invested. That level of pre-launch hype is almost unheard of. There was no product, no demo, no public information, just mystery. And mystery is powerful. But when mystery and hype becomes bigger than the product itself, the product can never win. In December 2001, after months of speculation, the world finally got to see the product for the first time on national television. It balanced itself. It leaned forward to move. It looked futuristic. It was called the Segway Human Transporter. The price was around $5,000. $5,000 for something that moves slightly faster than walking. That was Segway's first crack. All the hype had positioned it as the next car, the next internet, the next urban revolution. But what people saw was a scooter. Yes, nobody had ever seen anything like it before. Yes, it was engineering genius. But consumers don't just buy engineering. They buy something that solves a problem, is going to make life easier, and make them look good while doing it. The Segway did not clearly deliver any of those. Here was the core belief behind the Segway. Cities would redesign themselves around it. Sidewalks would adapt. Cities' infrastructure would change. People would go from short car trips to a quick Segway around the corner. That assumption was unbelievably ambitious. Instead of building a product that fit into the world, they assumed the world would reshape itself around the product. That never truly works. The automobile succeeded because roads already existed. The smartphone succeeded because cellular networks already existed. But the Segway did not belong anywhere. It was too fast for sidewalks, too slow for roads, too bulky to carry inside easily, and too expensive to justify casually. It existed in a strange middle ground, and no revolutionary start to an empire ever starts in a strange middle ground. Before launch, some insiders predicted that 10 million units would sell instantly. In reality, early sales were reportedly just in the tens of thousands. That is not just missing projections, that is 100 times less than predicted. When you build that much hype, you do not just create excitement, you create expectations. Expectations that no product can realistically satisfy. Imagine if the iPhone had been introduced as something that would replace cars, reshape cities, and change civilization. If it did not immediately do all three, people would have laughed. The Segway did not fail because it was bad. It failed because it was introduced as life-changing, and life-changing is impossible to live up to. There was also an image problem. Who was actually buying Segways? Not teenagers, not trendsetters, not urban professionals. It was mall cops, security guards, and tour groups. That became the brand identity. Brand identity forms fast, and the moment a product gets labeled in culture, it is hard to reverse. Instead of symbolizing the future, it became a joke. Once a product becomes a joke, growth slows dramatically. No one wants to spend $5,000 to become a laughingstock. There was also a legal and infrastructure problem. Different cities did not know how to classify it. Was it a pedestrian device, a vehicle, or something else entirely? Regulations were inconsistent. Some cities restricted sidewalk use, others limited road access. When customers feel uncertainty about where they can use something, they hesitate. Adapting something into day-to-day life requires clarity, and the Segway dived headfirst into confusion. In 2009, British businessman Jimmy Heselden purchased Segway Inc. Just months later, in 2010, Heselden tragically died after riding a Segway off a cliff near his estate. The headlines were brutal. Even though it was a personal accident and not a product malfunction, the symbolism was devastating. A company already fighting for mainstream credibility suddenly faced becoming a global mockery again. Momentum matters, and Segway never truly got it back. Over time, the Segway found niche uses in tourism, warehouses, law enforcement, and industrial facilities. But the world-changing revolution never came. In 2015, the company was acquired by Ninebot. By 2020, production of the original Segway PT was discontinued. After nearly 2 decades, the device that was supposed to redesign cities quietly rolled away, not with a bang, but with a whisper. It was not engineering that caused the failure. It was not funding. It was not even demand in certain circumstances. It was positioning. Segway marketed itself as inevitable, but consumers do not purchase inevitability. They purchase practicality. The company tried to start a transportation revolution from the top down, but revolutions usually start from the bottom up. Cars were not revolutionary at first. They were noisy and unreliable, but over time, they became cheaper than horses and solved real problems gradually. The Segway tried to skip the gradual part. It aimed straight for transformation, and that leap was too big. This is something seen constantly in business. Founders fall in love with how impressive their product is. The more complex the technology, the more they assume it deserves the people's attention. But markets do not reward complexity. They reward need. If a 10-year-old cannot instantly understand why they need it, there is friction, and friction kills momentum. Segway required explanation. Cars did not. Smartphones did not. Even electric scooters today do not. You see one and you understand it. With the Segway, people had to ask why they would not just walk, and that question was fatal. Hype is a double-edged sword. It can amplify success, but if the product cannot instantly deliver on the emotional promise, hype accelerates failure. Disappointment spreads faster than excitement. The bigger the buildup, the harder the fall. Segway's buildup was enormous. When insiders say something will change humanity and consumers see an expensive scooter, trust erodes. Once trust erodes, sales stall. Imagine an alternative timeline where Segway launched quietly, without a mystery campaign and without a destiny narrative. Imagine it simply positioned itself as a fun and efficient way to move short distances, targeting college campuses and building culture organically while lowering the price over time. Instead of promising to reshape cities, it might have carved a profitable niche. But once you promise to reshape civilization, being niche feels like failure, even if you survive. The irony is that Segway was too successful before it even launched. There was too much money, too many expectations, and too many predictions. The product did not fail because it was useless. It failed because it could not possibly meet the hype built around it. And before we reveal number 1, if you've made it this far, make sure to subscribe for more videos breaking down the biggest business disasters. Now, Segway was one of the most overhyped inventions ever, but number 1 is a mistake that shocked the entire car world. Jaguar. They were selling nearly 2,000 cars a month. Then they sold 49. A 102-year-old luxury icon did not slowly decline. It fell off a cliff. In just 5 months, 97.5% of its European sales vanished. And it all began with an advertisement that did not show a single car. In November 2024, Jaguar deleted its entire social media history. Every photograph, every campaign, every trace of more than a century of heritage disappeared overnight. In its place, the company released a 30-second film filled with bright colors, avant-garde fashion, abstract slogans, and 2 words: copy nothing. Within 48 hours, the video generated more than 160 million views across platforms. Elon Musk replied publicly with 4 words: "Do you sell cars?" It was sarcastic, but it captured the question millions were quietly asking. 5 months later, the numbers arrived.
In April 2024, Jaguar sold 1,961 vehicles across Europe. In April 2025, it sold just 49. That is not a slowdown. That is near extinction. What makes the collapse more striking is that Jaguar Land Rover, its parent company, reported record profits of $2.5 billion that fiscal year. Land Rover was thriving. The Defender alone sold over 115,000 units. It was the same parent company, the same supply chains, and the same macroeconomic environment. One brand was booming, the other was collapsing. To understand the fall, it is necessary to understand what Jaguar once represented. Founded in 1922, Jaguar built its identity on elegance and speed. The E-Type was once described as the most beautiful car ever made. The company won Le Mans multiple times and, for decades, symbolized British performance and understated luxury. It was never the largest automotive brand, but it was undeniably iconic. Global sales peaked at more than 180,000 vehicles in 2018. After that, the decline began. By fiscal 2024, sales had fallen to roughly 67,000, and executives admitted something uncomfortable. The company was selling cars, but making almost no profit. Jaguar had become trapped in the worst possible position. It was not affordable enough to compete with mainstream brands, yet it lacked the prestige and pricing power to dominate Mercedes-Benz or BMW. Leadership concluded that incremental improvement would not be enough. Instead of competing in a crowded middle ground, they chose reinvention. In 2021, Jaguar announced a radical transformation. Every existing model would be discontinued by the end of 2024. The XE, XF, F-Type, E-Pace, and I-Pace would all disappear. Production would stop completely. The brand would relaunch as an ultra-luxury, all-electric manufacturer, with vehicles priced above $130,000. The strategy focused on lower volume and higher margins, prioritizing exclusivity over accessibility. Internally, the plan was called Reimagine. On paper, it sounded bold and strategic. Stop playing in a segment where you are losing and move upmarket, where margins are higher. However, there was a critical flaw. The first new electric model would not arrive until late 2026. This meant that for more than a year, Jaguar would effectively have almost nothing to sell. Dealerships would sit empty, revenue would fall towards zero, and the company would rely heavily on financial support from Tata Motors to bridge the gap. Leadership believed this fire break was necessary. In their view, a clean break was the only way to rebuild identity. Yet cars are not software updates, and luxury brands are not technology startups. Heritage cannot be deleted and reinstalled later. When Jaguar wiped its history from social media, it sent a symbolic message. It suggested that the past no longer mattered. The slogan, "Delete Ordinary," was meant to inspire a bold future, but to loyal customers, it sounded dismissive. At the precise moment Jaguar needed loyalty, it risked alienating the very base that had sustained it. The unveiling of the Type 00 concept car intensified the reaction. Revealed at Miami Art Week in bright pink and electric blue, the angular design looked unlike any Jaguar before it. Comparisons to toys and exaggerated concept art spread quickly. Yet the deeper issue was not simply design, it was timing. Customers were being asked to wait more than 2 years without production models, test drives, or tangible proof, only promises. Competitors chose a different approach. BMW continued selling petrol vehicles while introducing electric models such as the i4 and iX, with electric sales rising over 30% year over year. Audi expanded its e-tron lineup while maintaining familiar models like the A4 and A6, achieving electric growth above 50%. Mercedes integrated electric platforms into recognizable vehicles, giving customers a bridge between the old and the new. Jaguar removed the bridge entirely and expected customers to leap. The consequences accumulated quickly. European sales collapsed by 97.5% year over year. United States dealerships were reduced from 122 to just 20 curated locations. The advertising agency behind the rebrand was dismissed. The CEO retired after 35 years with the company, and the chief creative officer departed 1 year after the reveal. Dealers reported empty showrooms and uncertain customers.
Sales staff had concept images, not cars. This collapse was not caused by a single controversial advertisement. The advertisement acted as gasoline, but the fire had been building for years. Jaguar had been losing relevance gradually. Instead of focusing solely on improving product competitiveness, leadership attempted to reset identity. They mistook attention for demand. Website traffic increased by more than 110% after the rebrand. Social engagement surged. Brand awareness rose. Yet awareness does not equal trust, and trust is everything when selling six-figure vehicles. Luxury customers rarely make impulsive decisions. They evaluate, compare, and return to brands with which they feel an emotional connection. Jaguar severed that connection before offering a replacement. Now, everything depends on 2026. If the new electric lineup delivers extraordinary design, long-range performance, and genuine ultra-luxury appeal, Jaguar could stage one of the most dramatic comebacks in automotive history. If it fails to justify the wait, this period will be remembered as the moment a legacy brand erased itself. From nearly 2,000 monthly European sales to 49, from heritage powerhouse to corporate case study. The most important detail is that Jaguar is not alone. Executives across multiple legacy brands are watching this experiment closely. Some are considering similar strategies, abandoning the past, repositioning aggressively, and betting everything on a future that has not yet arrived. If this gamble fails, Jaguar will not be the last iconic name to fall. It will simply be the first warning. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoy breaking down the biggest business mistakes, make sure to subscribe for more videos like this.